Hey everybody, today is the 4th of February 2025. Welcome again to a short video courtesy of investingsuccess.ca. I want to continue in this video my look at George Bayer, the man of mystery. Recall from the two previous videos, he was a German immigrant, arrived in New York around 1899, was very well schooled in the science of the planets, very much dialed into things like planetary retrograde, inferior conjunctions, aphelion, perihelion, you name it. He wasn't so much of a pure astrologer using houses and aspects and embedded meanings in all of that stuff. He was basically a hardcore planetary scientist. And he found that his knowledge of the workings of the planets, the orbital features of them, allowed him then to make buying and selling decisions. And for something like 4 decades, he made a comfortable living trading on the markets using the planets. Now, he had a rule that he called rule number 22. And basically, he said, as per rule 22, look for times when Mercury is at inferior conjunction. When it is, look for something to happen. Possibly a trend change, possibly an acceleration in the trend. So what is inferior conjunction? That is a heliocentric phenomenon. So if you were standing from a vantage point on the sun, you're looking out into the cosmos. You're seeing the planets all go around the sun in their orbital path. So somewhere out in the distance, you see planet Earth going around the sun. There will be a time when, from your vantage point on the sun, you see Earth, and exactly in alignment then with Earth, you will see Mercury. So Mercury is between the sun and the earth, and it's directly in your line of vision. So at that moment in time, Mercury is said to be at inferior conjunction. So that's what Bayer said to watch as per rule number 22. Let's look at an example. Let's take Canadian uranium miner Cameco. So here's a daily chart of Cameco. I have overlaid the chart with 3 events of Mercury being at inferior conjunction. So the first one is in April of 2024, then August of 2024, and then early December of 2024. So left-hand side of the chart, April 2024, look what happened. Price of Cameco is increasing. So Bayer's rule said something could potentially happen at the inferior conjunction. Well, yeah, the uptrend basically stopped and it turned into a sideways trend. Your stochastic, which I've got pictured in the lower pane beneath the chart, told you that it was rolling over. It went from being above its upper boundary line to curling and hooking below the upper boundary. So the bullish trend took a pause. It took a breather. August of 2024, price of Cameco had come down. It had started to exhibit a bit of a counter trend rally. You know, it had been falling during the last week of May, all through June, all through July, and yeah, it was time for some kind of a counter trend rally. However, you've got this inferior conjunction event, and Bayer says, hey, watch that. Well, sure enough, literally 3 days after that inferior conjunction event, what happens? The stochastic runs out of steam. It can't get above that upper boundary line. The stochastic is saying, yeah, the price has gone up, but there just isn't enough momentum here to turn this into a full-on bullish event. So a lot of people, I'm certain, got caught. They probably thought that Cameco was going to go and make new highs. No, it rolled over because human emotion got disturbed at the Mercury inferior conjunction event. December 2024. Price of Cameco had finally been rallying and had gotten, well over $80 a share. This whole climate change, green energy thing was resonating with people. And there was a lot of talk about these small modular nuclear reactors and how every city and every town was going to have one. And it was just wonderful until it wasn't. Mercury inferior conjunction came along, and right at that, almost to the day, look at what the price of Cameco did. It just stopped. Human emotion suddenly changed on a dime. People were no longer interested in buying into the Cameco story, and they turned tail on it, and down it came. The stochastic told you that something was happening. It told you that the trend was changing. And change it did. Let's look at another example. This is rather stunning. 10-year U.S. Treasury note futures. November 2024. The price of these futures is rising, which indicates that yields are falling. So good news if you want to take out a mortgage at a bank. But all of a sudden, Mercury inferior conjunction arrives, and literally a day later, the price of the 10-year Treasury note futures stops. It's not going any higher. Human emotion suddenly changed. And these things start heading lower. And interest rates start heading higher. And so suddenly there's a lot of talk about, well, interest rates and mortgage rates are going higher, bad for the economy. You've seen it, you've heard it on the financial news networks. But right at that Mercury inferior conjunction event was the tipping point for this change in the U.S. 10-year Treasury note futures. Let's look at another example. This is a copper mining stock. I have traded it before. I have made good money on it before. It's called ERO Copper, headquartered in Canada, trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange, also on the New York Exchange. It has a significant copper mining project in Brazil, and I haven't actually touched it lately because there was some news that came out, back in the summertime, which didn't really sit too well with me. I noticed that the grades coming out every quarter, they would report their average grade of copper ore that came out of the mine. And I noticed that those things were not the greatest anymore. And then I noticed that they had entered into a deal to earn something like a 60% interest in another copper mining project in Brazil, and that was going to cost them something like $1 billion over 2024 through to 2029. It wasn't the greatest of news, so I haven't looked at ERO lately, but I'm going to show you a chart of it here in the context of the Mercury inferior conjunction. Let's go back to March of 2024. Price of ERO is going up and gets to $30 a share. Everybody's crazy about copper because, well, we're going to be building all these data centers for artificial intelligence. You know the story. All of a sudden, Mercury inferior conjunction comes along, and boom, that uptrend on ERO copper just stops. And it starts to pull back. And I'm sure that it caught a lot of people off guard. August 2024. Price of ERO copper has been coming down. It's below the 200-day moving average. And all of a sudden, it stops and it starts to go up. But then it runs into Mercury inferior conjunction. So what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 days, 4 trading days later, all of a sudden, the stochastic tells you this thing is rolling over. Trend is changing, just like Mr. Bayer said it potentially could at these events. December 2024. Price of ERO copper is coming down. Finally, I think people are seeing what I've been seeing. And, from $31, all of a sudden, this thing is bleeding profusely. Mercury inferior conjunction comes along, and the stochastic is bumping along its lower boundary. And it's basically saying that this thing is just going nowhere. It's going down. The Mercury inferior conjunction actually added a little bit of insult to injury, and it accelerated the trend, if you will, and it took it below $19. Stock has recovered a little bit since then, but it's not looking terribly well, and this is a mining stock that I don't think I'm going to touch anymore, but I've used it here to illustrate the Mercury inferior conjunction. And by the way, these examples that I'm grabbing, these are literally random examples. I don't sit here and look for the perfect example for you. I'm just grabbing stocks, commodities at random from my software here, and I'm overlaying them with these Bayer rules to show you how they work. Let's give one to Mark Zuckerberg. Here's Meta. If we go back to December 2023, there's a Mercury inferior conjunction event. And, the stochastic is above its upper boundary level. Things are looking bullish. But, 3 or 4 days after, all of a sudden, Meta rolls over. And it drops $20. And the stochastic actually rolls and goes beneath its upper boundary line, saying that this bullish trend for now is going to take a break. And it did. And then it eventually got going again. But, to a person potentially buying it right, going into the end of December 2023, yeah, that would have been a little disturbing to suddenly see it pull back. And you would have been sitting there wondering, gee, have I made a mistake? Did I get into this at the wrong time? Well, knowing that these Mercury inferior conjunction events exist, probably a good idea to watch them and watch what the trend is doing on either side of them. Jumping ahead to April 2024, the stochastic unable to get above the upper boundary line. So the stochastic is saying to you, the price might be elevated, but there's no bullish story here. Mercury inferior conjunction confirms that. Price of Meta at the time was $520 a share. And look what happened. Mercury inferior conjunction, and it just rolls over, and it starts to draw down in value. Tries in vain to recover, but then falls out of bed completely. Let's continue here our look at Meta. August of 2024, price had been rising again. You're back around that $500 mark. Mercury inferior conjunction says, hey, something could potentially happen. Stochastic is above its upper bound, but it's hooking over. It's telling you something's changing here, folks. And it did. It actually drew down from about 520 down to 500. So, I mean, not huge if you're hanging on for the long term, but to a short-term trader, this makes a big difference. Same thing in December 2024. Price is going up. Mercury inferior conjunction comes along. Stochastic is above its upper boundary, starting to pull back, hinting that it may want to drop beneath there. And literally 1, 2, 3 days after the Mercury inferior conjunction event, what does Meta do? It has one of its little drawdowns. It goes from 630 down to 580. That's a $50 drawdown. And, to anybody getting in at that point, suddenly you've got a $50 per share drawdown. You're wondering, wow, what have I done? What kind of an error have I made? George Bayer tells you, don't get into these things around these Mercury inferior conjunction events. Wait and watch and see what the trend is going to do. And if it changes, maybe it changes to your advantage. Here's E-mini S&P. This is the final example. April of 2024 had been rising, and the stochastic tells you this bullish behavior is coming to an end. Rolls over, goes beneath the upper boundary. Along comes Mercury inferior conjunction, and what did Bayer say? Look for something to happen, potentially a trend change, potentially an acceleration in the trend. Well, we had already established here that it had rolled over as per the stochastic. So now you've got the beginnings of a bearish trend. Mercury inferior conjunction says, let's add a bit of fuel to that fire, and it pushed the S&P down. Human emotion just became very dour, very negative for a while in April of 2024. August of 2024, S&P came down, but then people started to buy into it again. And I'm sure that just when people were thinking, hey, this thing is going to be going a lot higher, Mercury inferior conjunction comes along, and that uptrend went sideways and then ultimately rolled over. Look at what happened in December of 2024. Again, S&P is rising. We're coming into the end of the year. Everybody is saying, wow, 2025 is going to be the most amazing year in the history of mankind. You're going to see the S&P really rock. It's going to just explode. Mercury inferior conjunction had a slightly different opinion of the matter. And look at where it occurred and look at what the S&P did. It's almost like flipping off a light switch. It just rolled over. And you know what? We've kind of recovered a little bit here, but we're struggling. But in that event in December, knowing that that inferior conjunction was coming, that could have saved you a lot of heartache. So use these things. Bayer did for 4 decades, and they served him well, and these rules will serve you well, I am certain. Now, the one thing I do want to point out here, you will see on this chart, and I didn't overlay this same thing on every chart, but every time you get a Mercury inferior conjunction, that always is associated with what we call Mercury retrograde. Okay? So, you know, you can see that a lot of times these trends will actually do their rollover or their changes at the beginning or the end of Mercury retrograde. And the inferior conjunction will typically occur right in the middle of that entire retrograde event. So there's the connection that you also need to look for. All right. That's it for this one. So that was Bayer's rule number 22. As always, you know where to find me at investingsuccess.ca. And I've got the astrology letter. Thanks for watching on my Substack channel. And always, always, always follow the trend. And that's the beauty of some of these rules laid down by George Bayer back in the late 30s, early 40s. He shows you that the planets are in charge. The planets are going to change human emotion. Human emotion is what's going to change the trend on the market. And so if you can anticipate, if you know what planetary phenomenon are coming your way, and he's got all of his rules documented, if you know that these things are happening, you can be prepared. And what's the old adage? Forewarned is forearmed. Well, there you go. Bayer's rules are going to give you an advantage over the average person on the markets, and you are going to be very well prepared. So thanks for watching, and I'm going to get busy and make a few more of these videos and highlight a few more of his rules for you. Take care.